We were so impressed with the Antec C8 in a recent review, we thought it would be a good idea to take a look at some more Antec cases. So today we're looking at this. It's the Antec Performance 1 FT ARGB. It's a full tower case with eATX motherboard support. It comes with 4 ARGB fans, lots of cooling options and a front I/O mounted temperature display. So on paper it sounds good, but let's take a closer look, build a system with it, test the thermal performance and see just how good it really is. So this is the Antec Performance 1 FT ARGB. It does come in several different versions, the Performance 1. The RGB version, which is this one, only comes in black. There's also black and white non-RGB versions that come with regular fans, no RGB. And there's also another black version that's a silent version with all steel side panels. You can pick up the Performance 1 FT ARGB currently in the UK from Amazon, priced at around £120 to £125. The front of the case features a temperature display that can show either CPU or GPU temperature or be turned off via a flick of the switch on the front I/O. The left-hand panel is manufactured from 4mm thick tempered glass to showcase internal components, while the right-hand steel panel is perforated at the bottom to enhance ventilation and heat dissipation. There's generous 30mm cable management space with integrated cable channels and Velcro straps and support for extreme cooling and easy installation with up to 420mm radiator support and removable radiator brackets and case panels. So Antec class this as a full tower case. It supports up to eATX motherboards and it has 8 PCIe slot cutouts at the rear. In terms of the actual size, I'd probably class it more as a large mid-tower case. It measures 522mm deep by 230mm wide by 522mm tall. So let's take a closer look at the case and some of its features. We'll start by removing the side panels. Each side panel is held on with a single thumb screw and then they're just quick release panels. On this black version, the glass is tinted. It's quite a dark tint. The right hand steel side panel is removed in the same way, just a single thumb screw and then it just pushes off the quick release fittings. You can see at the bottom of this panel you've got a vented section covered by a magnetic dust filter. The reason for that vent is if you have fans installed on the power supply shroud, the idea is that the case will draw air in through this side vent and up through the power supply shroud then into the system. The front panel is quite interesting. It's got like a combination of these vertical slats and mesh, so it should provide some good airflow and it can be removed quite easily. There's a couple of little magnets up the top, the panel hooks in at the bottom and then it's fitted magnetically to the case at the top. And you can see in there it's ultrafine mesh and that also acts as the dust filter, that mesh on the front. The outer part of the front panel, that's plastic. That can also be removed quite easily, pulls off from the top. It's just an ABS molded plastic. There's like a shiny part to that plastic on the top and you can see through that because on the top of the front panel you have this small LCD display that can show either the CPU or the GPU temperature. You can switch between those with the button on the top panel. Behind the front panel there are 3 pre-installed ARGB fans. They are Antec Tranquil 140, so 140mm ARGB standard 3-pin 5V ARGB headers. There's also a pre-installed 120mm version of the same fan in the rear of the case. Front I/O connectivity includes 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, a 10 gigabits per second USB Type C port, combined 3.5mm audio jack for headphones and mic. There's a power and reset button and the temperature display switch. The top outer panel of the case can be removed quite simply. You just push it from the back of the case there and it just clips out of the quick release fittings. You can see it's a large vented section on top of the panel and then underneath that there's a magnetic perforated steel dust filter and then you can go even further by removing a couple of screws and then the top radiator bracket is also removable. That's a feature that I like to see in all of these regular style ATX cases. On this bracket you can install either 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, or up to a 360mm radiator. That also includes a 280, a 240, 120. At the front of the case you can also install up to 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, but at the front the radiator support is higher. It's up to a 420mm radiator. There's 60mm of clearance between the front panel and the cutout on the power supply shroud, so you should be able to install fans at the front and then a really thick radiator. At the rear it's just a single 120mm fan supported there. I would have liked to have seen that be either a 120 or a 140. Then you could install 140s at the front, top and rear, but it's just a 120mm fan mount. Also on top of the power supply shroud, which covers the whole of the case, the top is ventilated, and on there you can fit up to 320mm fans. Motherboard tray supports up to eATX motherboards, so that includes eATX, ATX, micro ATX and mini ITX. There's 8 PCIe slot cutouts at the rear. You've got cable grommets on the side and the bottom cable cutouts, but the way that the top cutouts are designed, they don't really need grommets because you don't really see them up there. Maximum graphics card length in here is up to 400mm long, so I think that should accommodate any current graphics card. Maximum CPU cooler height, that's up to 175mm tall. So again, I can't think of any CPU coolers, CPU air coolers on the market that are taller than 175mm. So there's really good cooling support for air and liquid cooling. Turn the case around to the rear and it's a pretty standard looking regular ATX layout. 120mm fan mount, rear motherboard I/O cutout. There's 8 PCIe slot cutouts, horizontal. There's no vertical adapter or anything that comes with the case. At the bottom is the power supply mount, so it's a mount for ATX power supplies, and it's a removable bracket. Screw your power supply to that and then you shove the power supply in from the back, which sometimes makes things a little easier. You can also note there's some eyelets here for Velcro straps or zip ties, so you can manage your cables at the rear of the system using those. Turn it round to the right hand side and it's mostly about cable management here. At this side of the motherboard tray you've got about 25mm of cable management space, but then it increases from these cable grommets to the front to 30mm, and everything comes kind of pre-managed in these Velcro straps, but there is also more Velcro straps included. I think there's 10 points for Velcro straps on the rear. It looks like decent cable management options. Should be able to make a good job of cable management with those Velcro straps and the other points for tying down cables. And at the top of the case here, you can just make it out behind all the cables, is an ARGB hub. There's 4 standard 5V 3-pin headers on the hub. There's also a 4-pin PWM fan header on there. In terms of storage, you've got a few options. So on the back of the motherboard tray here, there's 3 2.5-inch SSD mounts. You just undo the thumb screw, these lift out, screw your drive to that, and then you can just clip it back in place and then tighten up the thumb screw. You've also got a hard drive cage on the floor of the case, and that supports either a 3.5 or 2.5-inch drive, or you can take the 2.5-inch adapter off the top, fit another 3.5-inch drive in there, or inside the tray you can fit a 2.5-inch drive. So you can either fit one 2.5, one 3.5-inch drive, or 2 2.5 or 2 3.5-inch drives on the cage. The drive cage on the floor is also adjustable. You just have to remove a thumb screw at the rear, and that thumb screw from the factory is extremely tight because there's no access in through the top of the power supply. With a screwdriver, you have to get some pliers on that to undo it. That should be a bit looser, I think, from the factory. Once you have loosened that screw off, you can, if you want, completely remove the drive cage, or there's several different positions it can be fitted in. So that's the front position, which gives you more space for cable management, and then you can adjust it slightly more to the rear to make space for larger radiator installation down through the power supply shroud cutout. With the drive cage installed on the floor, you can install an ATX power supply in the case up to 245mm long. If you choose to remove the hard drive cage, that increases the space for a power supply and cables up to around 440 millimeters. If we flip the case around so you can see the floor, there's not loads to talk about, but you have got 4 plastic feet with rubber pads on each corners of the case, so it feels quite stable when it's stood up. The feet are about 25 to 30 millimeters tall, so they should give you some ground clearance for airflow in through the bottom of the case, because you can see there is a large vented bottom section to the case covered by this dust filter. That's pulled out from the front, and it's a nylon type dust filter on a plastic frame. Underneath that dust filter, there's a large vented part to the case. So power supply airflow at the rear, and potentially if you have those fans mounted on the top of the power supply shroud, airflow is being pulled in from underneath and from the side. In terms of included accessories, you don't get a lot with the case. You do get a user guide, and then this box that contains a plastic container with assorted screws and standoffs and longer fan screws. And then you get this bag with some zip ties, Velcro straps, and there's a PWM fan splitter in there. That's all the accessories you get with the case.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the Master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out booleys.co.uk.
So for the test system build, I'm using an AMD Ryzen 9 7950X CPU. Motherboard is an X670E Aorus Master from Gigabyte. Graphics card is the Sapphire RX 7900 XTX Nitro Plus. Memory is a 64GB kit of G.Skill Trident Z5 RGB DDR5 6400 megatransfers per second. For storage, it's a 2TB Seagate Fire CUDA 530 PCIe Gen 4 x 4 NVMe M.2 SSD. The CPU cooler is this Antec Vortex 360. It's a all-in-one liquid cooler with a 360mm radiator and 320mm ARGB fans. That's installed in the top of the case, and I'm just using the stock fans at the front and the stock rear fan. I did also add some of these Antec Fusion 120s for thermal testing. I added 3 of those on the power supply shroud to test the effect on that. And the power supply is this Antec Neo Eco fully modular ATX3 and PCIe 580 plus gold, and it's a NE 1000G, so it's 1000 watts. So the system's built. It's up and running, as you can see. AIO's mounted at the top with the fans as exhaust. The stock 140mm fans at the front, they're intakes, and then you've just got this rear 120mm exhaust fan. They're all stock fans, apart from the ones on the AIO CPU cooler. The build process was quite easy. It's a good case to build with. Everything lines up correctly. All the panels are easy to disassemble and reassemble back to the case. Lots of space in the case. If you want to use some custom loop cooling in here, 420mm radiators are supported up front and a 360 at the top. There's plenty of space around the right hand side for cable management, so I've nothing really to complain about during the build process, but I've got a couple of things to mention, some pros and cons about the case in a moment. But first, let's take a look at the thermal performance, and as usual, it's a combined Cinebench R23 and 3D Mark Speedway stress test simultaneously for 30 minutes. If you want to check out the full testing methodology, head over to kitguru.net, and there is a written page over there that explains all the case testing methodology. We tested the case thermals with a 360mm AIO CPU cooler installed in the roof, and with the case in several different configurations. As you can see from the chart, changing the case configuration had little to no effect on either the CPU or GPU thermals. Removing side and front panels and dust filters, as well as adding fans to the top of the power supply shroud, made no difference to the hardware temperatures. The recorded hardware temperatures are as we would expect for this CPU and GPU configuration, which indicates that the case has good airflow in the default configuration. Because of the consistency during thermal testing, the fan speeds of both the CPU cooler and graphics card remained constant, which means that noise levels are unaffected by changing the case configuration. 49 decibels max noise output is very noticeable, but it's not the highest we've seen from similar case testing. However, fine-tuning of fan curves might be required if you're working in a noise-sensitive environment. So overall, it's not a bad case. The build quality is good. All the panels align well. The quick release fasteners from the side panels all work as they should do, and all the mounting holes for the motherboard, the PCI screw holes and things like that, they all line up perfectly. The only one thing that I want to mention about the build quality is those thumb screws that are a bit tight from the factory, especially those underneath the power supply shroud that are difficult to get to with a screwdriver. Cable management is good in this case. On the right hand side towards the front, you've got that 30mm of cable management space, which is very generous, and even on the motherboard tray area there's about 25mm of space, which is more than enough for routing EPS power cables and anything else you may need to route up there. I found it quite easy to route most of the cables at the front in the 30mm space. It was literally just the EPS power cables that need to run up at the back of the motherboard tray. It's got cable grommets in the cutouts where they're needed, and the channels towards the front of the right hand side panel with those Velcro straps, they're really handy. You don't need a lot of additional straps or zip ties with those cable channels and those Velcro straps. And the pre-installed fans, they seem to work well. In terms of airflow, you've got great potential in this case for cooling with 420mm radiator support up front, plenty of space for custom cooling. Adding a pump res combo at the front shouldn't be a problem, and there's plenty of room in the case for air cooling. Big air coolers up to 175mm tall. The only thing worth mentioning about the fans that come pre-installed is they're not daisy chained fans, so you have individual cables for the RGB and the PWM speed control. It means a bit more cable management, and there's more cables to connect up to the motherboard or a fan controller. But a three-way fan splitter is provided with the case, so at least you can connect the 3 front fans to a single PWM header on the motherboard. The temperature display on the front of the case, it's okay. It seems quite basic. In fact, the actual display kind of reminds me a bit of like a calculator display from the 1990s, so it is very basic. It's not like some of the high resolution LCD displays we see on some cases, but it displays the CPU temperature okay. Did have a problem with the 7900 XTX in this system. The Antec software, it picked up the graphics card and it recognized it in the software, but for some reason it wouldn't display the temperature of the graphics card either in the Antec software or on the display on the case, which is a bit disappointing. The iGPU from the 7950X, that worked perfectly in the software and on the display, so there's some problem maybe with this card and the Antec software, or maybe with certain AMD cards and the Antec software. Maybe that's something Antec needs to look at and improve in future. The only other thing that I think could be added to the case is a removable front fan and radiator bracket, because that is fixed to the front panel. It's not a removable one. It would make it slightly easier if you got a big radiator to install on that front panel if it was removable. So overall, it's not a bad case like the MSI case that I reviewed recently. This is just a regular style mid-tower ATX case. There's nothing particularly new or really interesting about it, but there are still a lot of people that prefer this kind of standard ATX layout over a dual chamber, and at the price of £120, it's not bad value considering the high-end hardware that can be installed in here and the pre-installed fans. So if you're looking for a regular style ATX case, this is not a bad one. So that's the Antec Performance 1 FT ARGB. Let me know what you think of the case in the comment section. If you've enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to Kit Guru. If you enjoy what we do here at Kit Guru and you want to help support us, you could always head over to our store, pick up some merch, or you could even subscribe to our Patreon. And as always, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.